Okay, so welcome everybody. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm very excited to talk about coaching ourselves. I'm an independent consultant. I have my own firm, but I also teach at the University of Notre Dame and in the Masters of Organizational Development program at Sonoma State University in the U.S. I've been affiliated with Coaching Ourselves from the beginning. We piloted the very early modules with my clients in a way to help leaders to be able to develop their leadership skills, but also to create alignment around the changes that they were leading, so they were working with their managers in small teams. But today I'm going to talk to you about how I'm using this now in organizations to lead large-scale change and transformation. So these are projects and initiatives that are taking 3 to 5 years to implement and shift the culture. So I'll show you how we're using Coaching Ourselves to support those change initiatives. So today's module is meant to be just a quick overview of 2 case studies, and then what we're going to do is open it up for a conversation. So it's really about sharing and building on our experiences. And also, I just found out Joanne Houle is in the room with us. So Joanne, okay. So Joanne and I worked on the early days at McGill in implementing Coaching Ourselves. So she'll share her story as well once we get to the model. Okay. Great. So I'm going to talk today about 2 case studies. The City of Ottawa. This was a very large-scale change where we were looking at implementing and creating a culture around service excellence. So I'll talk to you a little bit about how we started it, why we went the route we did in terms of developing our leaders and the role Coaching Ourselves played there. And then our most recent work on a large scale is with the Winnipeg Health Science Centre. And that's a very interesting story, and it's bringing Coaching Ourselves to the next generation, I think, of how we're using it for large-scale change. And then I'm just going to wrap it up with some reflections on leading transformation in organizations and provide you with a tool if you want to measure how this is working. And all of this material is going to be posted by Phil on an intranet site, so you'll have access to the article and the PowerPoints after. And then we'll wrap it up with reflections. So I just want to share the term culture shift. It really came about by accident. I was working with a large group at the City of Ottawa, and we were actually reflecting on the work that we were doing in their leadership program. And everybody's afraid of culture change. As soon as you say that, people get all nervous, right? And it's hard to engage people in a change when you say, here's our 5-year plan. How am I going to sustain motivation and engagement through that process? But one of our participants in about 4 months into the program, he had this big aha after they were working in their groups. And he said, you know, I feel the Titanic is moving. I feel the shift. And the shift was a culture shift. People were working differently. They were having conversations that they didn't have before. And at that stage, they couldn't believe that the city was actually encouraging them to network on real time about the real issues that they were dealing with across the city. So culture shift kind of stuck with me, and I use that. And it's a great way to also take a step back to take the bigger picture view or the helicopter ride on how well you're doing. And then you can celebrate successes, mark those milestones, and then keep people engaged going forward. So this is the frame I want to use when I'm talking about helping people to work differently together and build relationships and build the community that's needed in the organization. Okay, so the City of Ottawa. I was an employee at the City of Ottawa for about 10 years as a welfare worker, then the head of organizational development, and then I became their consultant and have been working with them for over 10 years in different ways, but to help them to actually develop the skills to lead the transformation that they've been undergoing. So when we started working on their project, they had a new deputy city manager and they had a new organizational structure. that they were putting in place to be able to be focused on service excellence. But they were starting right at scratch. They had to create a shared vision, a shared mindset around service excellence and what that meant and what that was going to mean in terms of a culture change and the transformation. At the time when we did this, they hadn't had any training for about 10 years. A lot of the funding was in technology and new processes, but they didn't focus on developing the people to lead and manage in that context. So they asked me to develop a Service Excellence Leads program, and they wanted everything we were doing at McGill at the time to bring their learning alive. So we developed a model, and we had a design team to do that. And the purpose of the program was to help them to build the learning community that was going to be needed to be able to achieve the long-term success of service excellence in the city. The word community was very important when we were doing this. It was heavily siloed. A lot of the different departments didn't work together. There were multiple competing visions and priorities. We also had a very bad political situation. The mayor was in the press for a lot of negative press and so on. So there was a lack of trust and confidence in the city at the time. So we were starting really in a bad place. So the city manager at the time saw service excellence as a way to tie the city together, to create some passion and energy and purpose around the work they were doing at a higher level so that everybody could be engaged and working towards a common vision. So we spent a whole year working at trying to figure out what that looked like. We involved the whole organization in different conversations, and then we created the development program that I'm going to talk about now. The other part of this goal, this program, was also we needed to develop people at all levels at the same time as we were going to implement this strategy and build the strategy. So that was really key. So we did put in structure and a process to provide people with tools and supports all along the way, but at every level and across the organization. So over a 10-month, this program was actually rolled out in 3 cohorts. We had 60 people per cohort, and then we had Coaching Ourselves learning clusters. So the principle behind the program was that what we were going to be training and developing the skills and knowledge and abilities that we were going to be training and developing with the senior service excellence leads was going to actually then get cascaded to the next level, which were the managers and the frontline service providers. So all the tools, all the content, all of our processes that were built in class were portable. So they were encouraged and also asked to cascade that and do the same with their next level managers. So over 3 years, we started with the group of 60 and the senior leaders who came in and participated in dialogue conversations, and periodically at certain checkpoints along the way, they came into the classes so that they can get a read and a finger on the pulse of what was happening across the city in one room at the same time. And this grew to doing manager forums, which had never been done before. There were 16,000 employees at the city, so the first year we did manager forums, 4 of them in a year, with 200 managers, and then at the end of the 3rd year we were at 500 managers. So we really worked at trying to build the common mindset, the skills, knowledge, and abilities up and down and across the organization. So this was the program. There were five key topics that we covered, and then there was an integration impact action workshop at the end. That was really key, and later I'm going to show you how that's evolved now into an approach to evaluate your transformations and your large-scale changes. So built into this program, though, we did build on friendly consulting that you heard of yesterday when Henry met with you at McGill, and also a little bit this morning. And that was a really key piece of this program. Over the beginning of the program, the first 3-4 months, we looked at what were the key challenges that the city was facing in fostering a culture of service excellence. And those key strategies were really citywide. They were, every department had a say in how to address and how they were dealing with those challenges. And then what we did is we held a day in the life so they can explore those challenges. So one challenge was moving to a mobile office. So that was going to save the city money in terms of space and be more efficient and be more customer focused and more customer driven. So we had one group that was actually doing that very well, but we had about 6 other departments moving in that direction. So we had a team that was leading that challenge, and they went and observed a day in the life of how it was working in the city. Then they would come back and they would present what they observed in that half day. It was only a half day, and it was the slice of the organization, top, middle, bottom, and customer. And then we had a conversation of what they observed and how they can use their experience to advance their strategies. So we did that there were 8 challenges at the time in the first cohort, but this was something that they did over 3 years, and I taught them how to do it, so now they do it on their own, and now other departments are doing it, and so on. So it has a ripple effect, all within the principles of building on people's experiences and helping each other as they go through those processes. So there was the in-class content pieces that were very targeted around what the themes and patterns were that were emerging to help people develop the skills and knowledge and abilities that they needed. The second level that was a stream that went all the way through was action learning, but in real time, that was targeted to support the strategy. So HR and organizational development and performance played a key role here. They provided coaching and supports for developing the strategy during the strategic planning process, during the HR succession planning process, and so on. So that was very targeted and really focused on the real work that needed to be done. But the last line, which is a really strong thread that really was making a huge difference in creating awareness and a common understanding, but then eventually really building community across the city, was the Coaching Ourselves learning clusters. So we purposely designed those learning clusters so that they were representatives at each cluster from across the city. So they were not allowed to be at a table with someone they worked with every day. We had different levels of the organization, so we had senior people, we had directors, and we had managers at those tables, but everybody was assigned a service excellence project that they were responsible and accountable for. We also gave the group carte blanche. They can pick whatever topic they wanted. So it was very self-directed. So the groups of 6, they were 6 people. If it gets too big, you lose some of the focus. So groups of 6 picked the topics that were going to help them to advance the work they were working on. And I really believe that was super key, because then it was very real for them. It built in accountability and responsibility for their own learning as well. And then we did checkpoints. So after every 3 months, we asked them what topics they used, what added value, and then they then wanted to use each other's topics and stuff. So there's no way I could read 70 topics, so this was a really good way to build synergy across the city. So the biggest takeaway from that was some people discovered resources in these groups that didn't exist in their own. So a pilot of the corporate video was made because one department had some extra money and they had a videographer, and so the other person had the idea, and then they produced the pilot, then that went viral. We had people collaborate on projects because somebody had to build a communication strategy for public works, and they came in with a plan. They said, okay, in 3 months we're going to do all of this, and they realized they couldn't do it on their own when you start thinking community and you think about restraint and resources and stuff. So then they started to look teams that were citywide, cross-functional. But they drove it. That was the difference. So when you talk about engagement, it wasn't a leader coming in and saying, thou shalt. It was, oh my God, this is what's happening. We could do this. So that was the takeaway for the City of Ottawa. And they're still doing this, by the way. They're still using Coaching Ourselves, and it's 5 or 6 years later. Okay. Yeah. So you do have to do that. You do have to put some thought into how you set it up, right? Because we're not selling Coaching Ourselves, really. I hate to say that. Where's Warren? We're selling the approach, right? And this is one vehicle. When I talk about Health Science Center, I'll show you how we're doing the blend. But basically, so what we did is, first of all, remember they didn't have training for 10 years. Like there's the high potential leaders were sent off, but the majority did not get the training on the managing and leading, right? So that was a good hook, because the city was very symbolically saying we're investing in you and we believe in you, and we did all the right things. We had the leaders talk about that. We had people talk about their experience and so on. I mentioned that we piloted Coaching Ourselves with some of my clients. So one of the women who was running all of emergency and protective services in a male-dominated environment was our pilot group. So she was a credible and respected leader. So she talked about why this was really important and how she used it and the benefit for her team in creating alignment and the management skills that they needed. But we did a pilot in the program. So there is a topic, I'm getting in the weeds now, but there's a topic called the 2 models of change. So we actually did that live because we were trying to, I picked that topic because it was the topic of what we're trying to do is lead change and transformation. So then they got to do that and experience it in real time. So that's how it got started. Now to sell and support, you can't just let it all go. You do need to provide some structure when you're doing it in a large-scale way. So we had the organizational development team support each group. So they weren't the facilitator. This is really key, because the principle of Coaching Ourselves is that it's a flat group, right? Self-directed. But in a busy life, you need to have a schedule. It does take time and stuff. So they played that kind of a role. They played the back-end facilitator role of making sure that it was in people's schedules, making sure everybody got the materials and kept the momentum going, and did the liaison to pick their topics with Phil, because Phil was involved in supporting. So that's how we set it up. And then we had, there's 2 ways you can do this. So with the Health Science Center, we have the HR people come together, and then we talk about what are they observing in the groups, and I do that at different checkpoints. But with the City of Ottawa, because they were part of the Service Excellence program, we built those reflections into our program. So we did a special, 30 minutes on every time we got together for our in-class sessions on how is your Coaching Ourselves session going, what are you learning, how are you applying it, and so on. And we tracked that because I know some people, we need some data, right? And we're looking for impact. So we tracked those stories, and then we were able to tell the story of their transformation later, which was in the Integration Impact Action section of the program. Is that okay? Okay? Okay. So these were some of the key program elements which I've talked about. So I'm going to go to the next one. So in terms of measures and impact, these are some of the measures. I'm not going to read them all, but basically there were over 200 projects. There were some key pieces that were foundational that helped them to get ready for the next big step in their transformation. They were moving into a one-stop shop for Service Ottawa, which was one phone call, and then the triage happens and so on. But these were early days. That wasn't there, so it was getting ready for all of that, which was key. And then we had 3 pillars in their service excellence strategy, which was really key. It was focused on employee engagement, client satisfaction, operational excellence. So So we had real data in terms of the scores of survey results and so on. So this helped us then to look at the bigger picture of the culture shift and how they were doing, and gave us some data to inform our program. So we measured also the initiatives on the enterprise and departmental level. So what's really key here is that, you know, people can die with PowerPoint presentations. I'm sure you've all been in strategy sessions and, you know, there's 15 presentations and nobody hears anything at the end. So we did some really innovative stuff here when we got to the integration impact piece, which was around coaching each other. So we blew up, I gave them some questions ahead to come in and talk about the work they were doing and the impact it had on them as an individual, in their department, and then in the city. And then we put them up and we did a gallery walk. So people just walked around and saw that, and then they actually asked each other questions and stuff, and it was very engaging, but it gave everybody a finger on a pulse of what was happening across the city in a conversation, which was really different, and it was, they continued to do that, which was cool. And then we brought the senior leaders in to hear at different points through the journey how it went, but at the end to hear about the impact pieces. And that was really key because the takeaway in that meeting, I'll never forget the first cohort, the leaders said, oh my God, I mean, my team's been telling me I have to let go, they know what they need to do. And after hearing everybody's reflections and the impact they were having, this convinced that leader to say, oh my God, like, I've got to let go. Like, it was his own personal learning defining moment, you know, and it came out of the conversation. So it was pretty cool. That's what we're always looking for, right? Those golden opportunities. So that's the City of Ottawa's journey. And the other big takeaway, I did mention that we had some trouble with confidence in the city from the perspective of the citizens and our politicians. So at the end of 3 years, this is really a big aha, they were able to go back to council and they got their budget approved without a penny being changed. And this was with a change in the mayor and council. So I really believe they did a great job in developing their transformation strategy and implementing the first 3 years, because they did turn the ship around. They did achieve confidence in the work they were doing, and they were visibly making a difference. So Winnipeg Health Science Centre, I'm just going to shift gears into this case study. This organization is challenged. It's very public. There was a homeless man that was in the waiting room for 3 days, not seen, and died. So they really had, if you look at Cotter's model, a burning urgency that they had to change. They were in the political eye. They were given mandates on turnaround times and targets for going through the ER and so on. So, but these were really, when you talk about community at our table, we were looking at communities we belong to. I worked with this organization, and they were very passionate about the higher purpose of the work they were doing, and it was really unfortunate that this is happening. So their big piece around service was about putting the patient first and focusing on the patient and creating a strategy for transformation. And this transformation required changes at all levels of the hospital. It was a large tertiary hospital. So you can imagine the leaders were nervous. They didn't know how, they thought they didn't know how to do this, which is interesting because they do know what they need to do. But we needed to provide a forum and a process to help them to have the conversation to develop their plan. So they asked me to measure, because they were under the microscope from the government, to measure everything they were doing, and they had to show that they were making success and they were reaching the turnaround times and so on. So I had never really done a lot of analytics in terms of cause and effect and so on. But I had been playing with this for a long time, and I knew building community and working with people and sharing experiences has a larger impact. So, and I believe it also helps you to lead large-scale transformational change faster, quicker, and deeper. And I was trying to prove that, and they wanted me to build something. So I worked with one of the nurses. She was the head of nursing, fabulous lady, and they were implementing Lean. And at a certain point, everybody thought Lean was going to be their big solution, you know, to make this shift happen. But they had lots of projects, they had the skills to deal with analytics and stuff, but they weren't really making a culture shift happen. It was not coordinated, and it was different projects all over. So I worked with her to develop a process built on the integration impact action piece to help to assess people's self-perception of how they were doing leading the transformation and the impact that our program was having on making that shift, and then to evaluate the impacts that people were having. So we actually, we did this survey after all of our sessions, and we measured the intersession activities. And we presented this at every single session that we had with all of the directors and the chiefs. And it was amazing. It was like their report card, their personal leadership report card. They were really engaged. And then at the end, they had lots of recommendations, and they had really good successes that they can communicate. So the idea here was that the transformation program was to be designed to help people from different disciplines across the hospital to be able to improve the process of the emergency department flow, manager engagement, and the patient care experience. So this was our program. This, you have to remember, in context, this was phase one of a larger process that they're going through. So this was around creating the common vision and the awareness of what needs to happen, as well as their transformation strategy. So we did this over 6 months. We incorporated the Lean Foundations program, and we are implementing, we did the friendly consulting exercise and the Coaching Ourselves Learning Network. So one of the imperatives of designing the program is that whatever we did had to develop the managers as well. And they had 200 managers as their audience. So the first session, when we did the experience change simulation, which is a simulation on change, and it's done with technology, and it's a lot of fun. And they learn a model of change. There was a huge buzz. The directors wanted everybody to have this, right? And we were getting ready to do coaching ourselves in our traditional way with the PowerPoints and so on. But when we're looking at design and impact, the leaders thought, no, we've got to do this ahead of time. And that group had never come together as a group for learning and development. They came together for announcements about what was happening at the hospital, and they were 30-minute sessions, you know, they were heads-up kind of things. So they purposely blocked off 2-hour chunks, and because it's a hospital, we were on the ground delivering at 7 in the morning, one session, and then another one in the afternoon, and they went through the same simulation, all in the same room, so 100 people in the morning and 100 people in the afternoon. But what it did is it was symbolic to show that they were really committed to supporting the managers. They were committed to making the bridge from what the directors and the senior people were doing and bringing it into the next level and then into their teams, because the expectation was that this would go further. So that's how we got started, but they are called the Coaching Ourselves Learning Network, and they like that. And we put the same sort of support structure in place. HR is at the table, but only as a support, not as the facilitator, and so on. So that's working super well, and they really enjoy the tools and so on that they're getting there. But the biggest takeaway that I have in this project is that the leaders stepped right in, and they saw the opportunities where they can get engaged with their manager group in a real easy, direct way. So there was not a lot of work on my part. They were taking charge and running with it, which is really cool. So we developed the friendly consulting exercise in this project was very powerful, and that was a bit of a culture shift. In a hospital setting, people look at numbers, they look at the process, and they're very analytic. And we were trying to get people to look at people and look at how you work as a community in that process. So one of the these were their change challenge teams, but one of the projects that the head of head of ED was working on was improving the consult process in the emergency flow, right? So you go through registration and stuff, and then somebody says, you need to go for x-ray, or you need to see this specialist, right? So the bed gets held up because it takes a long time for that requisition, just the paper, to get through the process, and then the doctor gets the call and then comes. So they wanted to explore their process. And this is, this man was so humble. He pulled together his multidisciplinary team that was working on this challenge, and that was the first. They hadn't worked in multidisciplinary teams like this before. And they decided what the day in the life would look like, and they did this in between. They didn't do it on the day I was there. They did the work in between, but when I was there, we facilitated the conversation around observations and stuff. And at the end of a whole day of work and stuff, they never once followed the patient through the process. They followed a piece of paper through the process. And if you think about that, they were having trouble with their lean processes, getting incorporated in the culture. They were doing a lot of technology. They did structural changes as a result of that big incident, but they didn't focus on the person. So he was horrified, but it was such a pivotal shift in everybody's thinking in that moment that now it's in every single plan, and they're doing things really differently. So the power of the friendly consulting exercise and sharing of observations and your experiences is just invaluable. Like it really advanced the changes that they were doing. So at the end of 9 months, they're continuing with their strategy. They've got more, they had plans at the end of this piece. Remember, this was early days. So now they're into the implementation and making this all come alive in the city, in the hospital. So that was what I just talked about. So why do this in a large organization? First off, people come from many different places. We have many, and when you're talking about transformation and change, there's lots of language around that, depending if you're coming from a Six Sigma model, Lean, Cotter's model, whatever. So this helps to create a common language. It helps to break through the assumptions that people have. It creates some synergy and alignment. And then it helps to actually co-develop what needs to happen next. So this is working really well, and they're getting ready now to roll out the more traditional Coaching Ourselves modules. So their reflections on the Coaching Ourselves Learning Network was that it was leveraging outside eyes into a workflow process and even a culture of an area that's very powerful. There's also a great benefit to working with other leaders in the organization to accomplish a goal. It offers learning and opportunities for personal leadership development and support in team building. There was a lack of clarity over the vision and where they were going, and at the end of this, there's actual, they said, vivid clarity over the direction, but also their line of sight on their impact and influence and the work that they were doing, how it was connecting. So before we go to table groups, I just want to invite Joanne. Do you want to say something about McGill? Because we did a similar project with the HR group. And
turn around. Yeah, briefly, about 7.5 years ago, Beth and I, director, Beth came in and we worked on it in a context where HR at McGill is somewhat decentralized. Most HR people report to be unit director. And the thinking was that we wanted partners, we wanted them to be able to connect with each other, to be constantly open to learning, to sharing, to really work from a sense of community. Had no line authority, but we were hoping that they themselves Thank you, that they themselves would find opportunities and create those. I realized today, 7 years later, that the woman who's with me from McGill was the most enthusiastic participant. Angela Morse is with Phil right now. Held on to those threads, and a number of us did. It sort of took, you know, there was an initial interest. There were a few groups that continued for a while. We learned a lot together, I think, about the content, the number of participants, and so on. One of the moments that was most powerful, I confess, it was when we were brought together with as supervisors of these HR people, central and those in the field, with Henry Mintzberg and with Phil Lanier. And as directors, we were sitting there being very important at our table and waiting, of course, having coffee. And Henry said, well, what about you guys? You have nothing to talk about. And he handed us the session on decision making. And it was, honest to God, the most powerful session, the most real dialogue we had with the least defensiveness before or after. It was, we could finally name something, which is in academia sometimes hard there to make decisions. We have to look like we're making decisions. If you make too many decisions, it's problematic. So we were learning together, and what stayed a constant has been the interest in, like we run reflection cafes, so we can bring people at similar levels together to have conversations. That works great. The first year we've ever been allowed to put it in the calendar. At first, cafes sounded fluffy, now it's substantive. But now we're getting senior people, finally, who are saying, well, what about us? Can we get together? And some of those dialogues are happening with the senior management in admin and finance, and it's sort of contagious. So the momentum is picked up, a lot of intact teams now, and now we have some of our unionized support staff folks who are saying, well, what about us? Are there topics where we can get together because we have ideas too? So it's the momentum's picking up, and we're learning a lot. We have a lot of questions around how do we integrate that with coaching circles and so on. So it's great to be here and to keep that exchange going. So I would love to hear from other folks offline who are learning as well and applying and adjusting. But
Good,
it's been great.
Thanks. Well, let's hear from you now. We've got 5 more minutes, right? 5:10 after. 2 to 3? Okay. How about some stories of how you're using Coaching Ourselves for large-scale or transformational change? Or if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer.
Thanks, Bev. That was fantastic. Just an observation, I suppose, is the trust that people must have in you to take on a project like this, to imagine something long-term, broad-scale, and to then actually go with you through the process of developing it. Could you talk a little bit more about how you've established that relationship, or how? Because often I think in our roles as consultants, and we get brought in just for a small piece, and you know what's required is the broad scale sort of change, but we're not given that sort of access.
Oh, okay. It's an interesting question. It happens in different ways for different clients because they're looking for different things. So I'll tell you a quick fun story, because I just presented to you the Winnipeg Health Science Centre. So they read an article I wrote called Fostering a Culture of Service Excellence at the City of Ottawa, and Steve Kanalakis was the deputy city manager there. And trust is really key. They won't go there if, you know. So I said, well, I think you should talk to my clients, you know, because that way you can see, you can ask them like a reference check, right, and see. So the head of the hospital, unbeknownst to me, invited all his executive team. He used it as a learning opportunity. So he had all his executive team on the call. And so, but he called Steve and he called Donna Gray, who was in charge of organizational development, because they knew they had to build some kind of support inside. And said, these are our questions and we want to talk with you. So I get a call from Steve and Donna going, oh my God, Bev, you know, we have to do some homework before we have this call. But it helped them to reflect on their journey, which was really important, and they were at a certain place, so it worked for them too. And so they had this call, and it was like a learning community between the two around sharing their pain and looking at what can happen. And their biggest question was, how flexible is Bev? Because a lot of consultants will go in and say, okay, here's the time, here's what it is, and then if you want to use more of this, you've got to pay more and all that kind of stuff. And I come from the philosophy, I grew up in the city, I learned from lots of people who shared with me, so I believe that what we build together, what I have is yours, and then we could use that. And that was important because they didn't have a lot of money and they really needed that kind of support. So I came in after my reference check, I guess, with some trust. But you have to keep that trust throughout and keep working at it, right? And one thing we forget about in all of this is small group dynamics and teamwork is key. If you can't work in a team, and I'm constantly working in different teams, you're not going to be successful. So understanding that and understanding resistance and how to work with that, I think, is what helps. Yeah. Any other? No? Okay. So thank you, everybody. I'm around for the next day and a bit, so you can follow up.